So to paint this gorgeous sky, you will need two colors mainly, which is phthalo blue and turquoise blue. If you don't have phthalo blue, that is absolutely fine. You can go with any other bright blue that you have got. You can either use Prussian blue, Indratone blue, ultramarine blue, or any other vibrant blue. To add in the reflection, I will be using indigo. And to paint the mountains and to add those birds, I will be using Payne's Grey. You can either use Payne's Grey or black. And to add the final details, I will be using white watercolor. Okay, let's start. I'm going to add the pencil sketch. I'm adding a line a little below the center of the paper. Then I'm going to add two mountains, a bigger one and a smaller one next to that. Then I'm going to add a piece of land over here, and that's our pencil sketch. For today's painting, we'll be using two techniques mainly. One is the gradient wash and the next one is the dry brush technique. Okay, let's start to paint. I'm going to apply an even wash of water onto the sky. Now to apply the gradient wash, I'm using my flat brush and I'm starting with phthalo blue. As I mentioned earlier, these are the two shades I will be using, phthalo blue red and turquoise blue. Both the shades are from the brand Rembrandt. On the top, we will be applying a very bright tone of phthalo blue, and towards the middle, we'll switch to turquoise blue, and as we reach the bottom, we'll again switch back to phthalo blue. So that is how I have planned the sky and the water. Okay, let's start with phthalo blue. I'm going with a very bright tone and I'm applying that onto the top of the paper. I will take it a little more down, then I will switch to turquoise blue. This is a very pretty vibrant blue. I mostly use it for water. I'm deliberately leaving little of white gaps in between. Not really gaps, a little tint of white. I'm not going with a very smooth gradient, but it's totally up to you. I'm washing my brush. Now I'm switching to turquoise blue. Make sure your brush is properly cleaned before you switch to turquoise blue. We need a clean and fresh tone of turquoise blue. Now add that in. Blend the colors well. You can see the kind of tone I'm adding. It's not too bright and it's not too light also. If you go with a very bright tone, you won't get that glowing effect in your sky. So go with a similar color. It shouldn't be too dark. Okay, now over to the bottom, I'm going to switch to phthalo blue. Add the phthalo blue over the bottom and blend that properly with the turquoise blue. So we have phthalo blue on the top, and over the middle we have turquoise blue, and again at the bottom we have phthalo blue. Now blend those three sections properly before your background dries. Okay, now I'm going to take the blue a little into the turquoise blue to make my sky look a little more dramatic. Now this step is totally up to you. If you're not too confident, go with a soft blend. I'll do the same thing over the bottom. Okay, so that's the sky and the water. Now I'm going to quickly add the reflections before the background wash dries over here and right underneath the mountains as well. So we'll get done with the background wash and the reflections in one go. Usually what I do is, after everything dries, I apply a coat of clean water and then add the reflection as a second layer. Okay, now I'm switching to a round brush and I'm taking indigo on my brush. I will add some phthalo blue into that so that I have a deeper tone of phthalo blue. I'll remove the excess water from my brush. Now I'm going to add some lines over the bottom. This will nicely bleed into the background, giving us reflections. So this is the ripples in your water. When you're closer to your masking tape, you can add thicker lines, and when you go away from that masking tape, you will need to add thin lines. So if you observe water, all those ripples which are closer to you will appear very dark and thick, and the ones which are away from you, they will appear very light and thin. We are trying to adapt the same here. I added my thick lines. Now I'm adding some thin lines right underneath this piece of land. Now if you wait for too long, your background layer will dry and you won't get these soft lines. Your lines will look too prominent and sharp. We want some soft lines. You can see the lines I'm adding, they're not looking too sharp. They're slightly blending into the background. Now right underneath the mountains and also underneath this piece of land, the shadows and the reflections will be too dark. So go with a darker tone just at these areas. Now when I'm adding the reflection for the mountain, I'm not making it very prominent. I'm not adding too many lines over there. I'm just adding a shade right underneath the horizon line. So if your background is still wet, you will get these soft lines. So do it before your background dries so that you have a soft reflection. Also, don't use too watery paint. If your paint is too watery, dab your brush on a paper towel and remove the excess amount of water. Otherwise, your paint will bleed into that background and create blotches. Water control is a tricky subject. It is something that you will learn gradually when you progress. It is just a matter of practice and you will automatically get it right. Now I'm going with a bolder tone of indigo and I'm adding some deeper tones right underneath the mountain and also underneath that patch of land. Just a little dark tones. Once you have added those dark tones, drag your brush from right to left and make those lines less prominent. You can remove the excess paint from your brush and smudge that into the background to give it a more softer look. Okay, so we are done with our reflection. Now we'll have to wait for this to dry, and the next task is to paint the mountains and add the snow. So the colors I used are phthalo blue and turquoise blue for the sky. Everything has nicely dried. You can see the kind of color I have here is very vibrant even after the painting dried. That is because I went in with a very bright tone in the first layer itself. Okay, now let's paint the mountain and that piece of land. I'm going with paint spray and I'm using my size number 8 round brush. Now I'm going to simply fill up the land and the mountain in this color. I'm going to apply a solid color. Now once you have reached here, you need to reduce the size of your mountains. I'm going to switch to my smaller size brush and I'm going to add some very tiny mountains. Go with a detailing brush or any of your brush which has a nice pointed tip and fill up the rest of the line with tiny mountains. I'm adding a line first and then I'll add some little bumps here and there. Our sky is literally glowing when we added those black mountains. You can do the same thing with different color combination. You can go with blue and purple. That makes a great combination. Or yellow and blue. You can try out the same subject with different colors. Okay, with that we are done with the mountains. Now we have to wait for this to dry before we add in the snow. Meanwhile, I'll paint that little patch of land on the right side. First I will add in the shape with my smaller brush. Then I will fill up that with this paint gray shade. So if you don't have paint spray, you can use black. It's absolutely okay. Now to add the snow, we will be using the dry brush technique. For that, we need to wait for the mountains to dry completely. Meanwhile, I'm going to add some birds onto the sky. Take out a rough paper and just follow the lines I'm adding here and go one by one. Don't rush. So first you add an arc line which is thin when you begin, and when you're taking it to the other end you can make it a little thicker. Then add a similar line on the other end, and to the center of that you can add a tiny dot which is the head of the bird, and over the bottom you can add a thick tiny line. So that's the bird. Easy, right? Now just by changing the space of that arc line, you can create different type of birds. For the second one, I made them a little more closer. It is not hanging down, so it's facing upward. In a similar way, I added the third bird. Now let's go with the fourth one. I'm adding the fourth bird also in a similar manner. I added the arc line, then added a dot and the tiny line in the middle. Now I'm going with a slightly different bird. This bird likes to take challenges. It's flying in a different manner, one wing up and one wing down. So all you need to do is change the spacing of the wings and also change the alignment. One can be a little up, one can be a little down, or you can go with symmetrical lines. So try out the same using different kind of arc lines. I will add one more using the same technique. And after this I will add few tiny ones in the background. Alright, I have added enough of birds. And now let's add the snow onto the mountain. My mountain has completely dried. I'm switching to my size number 2 brush and I'm loading my brush with white watercolor. Take your paper towel, dab your brush on a paper towel multiple times to remove the excess water. We need a dry paint on the brush. We don't want any water content. Okay, before I add the dry brush patterns onto the mountain, I'm going to do something else. This is going to make our painting look more interesting. Now I'm going to add a white tint under the wings of all these birds, and you need to see the kind of impact that's going to add to our painting, because we have a nice glowing dark sky, and once we add in this white tint under the wings, it is going to make it really beautiful. So we're leaving a tiny black line on the top. I added white paint under the wings, following the line of the wings we added, doing the same onto the other wing. That is all you need to do. Now let's go to the next bird. You need to use a very thin brush. Go with your size number 0 brush or any detailing brush to do this. So I'm done with my third bird. Now I'm going to repeat the same for all the other birds. You just need to add a white line following the shape of the bird you have added. For the ones in the background, go with a super thin line. These are already very tiny birds. You don't need to add a prominent white line. Go with the very delicate line. Okay, so we are done with the birds. Now it's time to add snow onto our mountains, and that is the last step. I'm using the same brush And I'm dabbing my brush on a paper towel to remove the excess water so that I have dry paint on my brush and it's easier to get these dry brush patterns. Now I'm scratching my brush on the mountain. We did this exercise quite a lot of times and I think you guys are quite confident with this technique now. Add enough of dry brush patterns onto the mountain. I'm adding them onto the top so that we have a snow-capped mountain. I just want to make sure I'm using white watercolor here. I'm just dipping my brush inside the tube and taking out a little of white watercolor. If you have white gouache, you can use that. If you're using white watercolor, go in a thicker consistency. Don't add too much of water. Otherwise, you won't get this opaque look. Now I'm adding some solid shade onto the top. I'm done with adding the dry brush patterns. Now I will add some thicker white just on the top to make it look like snow-capped mountains. So add a solid white on the top and smudge that into the background with dry brush patterns. You can use the same technique on a blue mountain, brown mountain, green mountain, any color that you want to. It's a very easy way to make a snow-capped mountain. Okay, now let's add some dry patterns onto that patch of land. Just 1 or 2 lines on the top and the bottom. And with that, we'll be done with our painting. I really like the color combination of this painting. Those black and white birds, the mountain and the sky. Here is our finished painting. I hope you all enjoyed painting this night sky. Maybe you can go with a much more darker tone of blue over the top and make it really look like a night sky and drop some stars. Anyway, I'm really happy with the colors and the overall painting. Thanks a lot for joining me.